Hello and welcome to my weekly podcast through the Bible in 10 to 20 years. Today we are in a series of pre-Easter sessions looking at the resurrection narratives. Today I want to look at Luke 24, 1 to 35. So do part of Luke 24 today and then hopefully finish it next week. And we should just finish in time to have these explanatory notes published the week before Easter. So let's go ahead and begin. I have Mark on the left and Luke on the right because, again, most scholars think that Luke used Mark as a primary source. Many scholars think that Luke also used Matthew as a source. Anyway, these are interesting debates, but let's get into the text, shall we? Luke 24. On the first day of the week, very early in the morning, the women took the spices they had prepared and went to the tomb. Now, Luke does not name the women in this verse, like Matthew and Mark both name the women, but we find out their names down here in verse 10. It was Mary Magdalene, that's the same in all three so far. Johanna. Now, Matthew and Mark don't mention a Johanna. Mark mentions a Salome. Could these be the same person? I suppose they could. Or maybe there were just more women than we know. So we've got Mary Magdalene, we've got Mary, the mother of James, we've got Salome, and we've got Johanna. There's at least 4 women that we have so far in our trek through the Gospels. Quite possible. They come and they tell the disciples of what they have seen. Hold a thought there. So also, they're coming with spices because they did not have time to anoint Jesus' body on Friday. He dies just before sundown, which is the beginning of the Sabbath, and so they have to kind of put a pin in it and say, well, early Sunday morning we're going to go and make sure this burial is done right, including spices. So they go to the tomb. Verse 2, they find the stone rolled away from the tomb. And verse 3, when they entered, they did not find the body of Jesus. So that's a little bit different from Matthew, where the angel tells them to look in the tomb and see that his body's not there. This should not trouble us. Oral tradition. This actually gives authenticity to the story, in the sense that oral tradition often has kind of little minor differences around the edges. The core is the same and little differences around the edge. So did the angel say, go look in the tomb? Or did they look in the tomb and then see the angel? I think it would be bad. It would not be appropriate to say, well, he told them to go look in the tomb and then they came out and then they found the angel too. Or they found 2 angels. There's 1 angel, they looked in, they came out and there were 2 angels. Those don't have a ring of truth, those kinds of harmonizations. And so rather, let's listen to each gospel in and of itself and to what each gospel has to say. Let each story stand on its own, and then acknowledge that traditions don't always have exactly the same details. Again, you'll have to decide what to do exactly with those sorts of things in your own pilgrimage. But I've decided that this is not something that we should worry about. So they do. Here in Luke, they find 2 men. So there was 1 man in Mark, there was 1 angel in Matthew, and now there are 2 men in clothes that gleam like lightning. Now, interestingly enough, Matthew says lightning. So here's a very small argument that maybe Luke also knows Matthew, that this idea of lightning. Or it could just be that's what people say, and he's gotten it not from Matthew, but from oral traditions about what the men look like. They were wondering about the empty tomb, and 2 men, I assume these are angels. In their fright, verse 5, the women bowed down with their faces to the ground, but then the men said, "Why do you look for the living among the dead?" So they are announcing the resurrection to the women. He is not here, he is risen. Verse 6, remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee that he would rise from the dead. Remember how he told you, verse 7, that the Son of Man must be delivered over to the hands of sinners, be crucified, and on the 3rd day be raised again. Then they remembered his words. One of the themes of Acts especially is that Jesus' death was all part of God's plan. Satan didn't pull one over on God. This was all ordained from the beginning, from beforehand. So very, very similar kind of theme here in Luke to that in Matthew and in Mark. Now, interestingly enough, Luke does not mention going to Galilee. This is one of the striking differences of Luke. Luke completely omits all the appearances of Jesus in Galilee. I think this is probably for I don't know, artistic doesn't quite get the right word for economy of narration. I mean, what's the phrase I'm looking for? Luke tries to keep it pretty straightforward here, and so for him to tell about I believe Luke knew about the appearances in Galilee. I fully believe that Luke knew about the appearances in Galilee, but he has decided to omit that because it doesn't create as economical a presentation. I think he wants to talk about the men on the road to Emmaus, and so he does not tell everything he knows, I assume. I assume he knows that there were appearances in Galilee. And so I think there is a takeaway here, and to realize that Luke the historian is not simply trying to give you exactly what happened. He is giving us what happened, but he is also crafting the story in a way that is economical and artistic in presentation. All of this says is that if all we had were Luke's gospel, we would know nothing about the appearances in Galilee. And according to Matthew and Mark, the appearances in Galilee were the focal appearances, it would seem. But Luke wants to focus on Jerusalem, and so he has not told that part of the story. No problem here, no error, no lying. Nothing, it's just simply he wants to focus on Jerusalem in his telling of the story. First, he doesn't tell about them being so afraid that at first they don't tell anybody. He just says they came back from the tomb, they told all these things to the 11 and to the others. So there you have it. Verse 11, but they did not believe the women. Their words seemed to them like nonsense. Verse 12, but Peter got up and went to the tomb, and bending over, he saw the strips of linen lying by themselves, and he went away, wondering to himself what had happened. There are some manuscripts that don't have that verse, and so there are some scholars in the past have suggested that was an addition to the later manuscripts, maybe in the light of John, because as we'll see in a couple weeks in John, they run to the tomb. Peter and the beloved disciple do. However, the vast majority of manuscripts do indeed have the verse, to where most modern translations of the Bible don't even tell you that there are some manuscripts that don't have the verse. I think probably it's more likely that John is building on what Luke says, rather than that Luke is some copyists of Luke or bringing that thing back into the manuscript of Luke. So Peter is singled out here. In a few verses, we'll find out that Peter has seen the risen Lord as well. Although, curiously, Luke doesn't tell us where that was. That's because I think it was in Galilee. That's my guess. My guess is that Jesus appeared to Peter in Galilee, maybe John 21 even. And so Luke didn't tell that part. But anyway, because he's focusing on Jerusalem. So anyway, let's keep going. So there is Luke's version of the appearance the women at the tomb. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to expand this because we're no longer looking at a parallel. There are no parallels to the road to Emmaus in either Matthew, Mark, or John. So verse 13, now that same day, so we're still on Sunday, it's still Sunday. On that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. Let's see how far 7 miles is. Footnote A, about 11 kilometers. Well, that doesn't help us, does it? I can tell you the Greek does not use either. I think stadia is what the text has it in. But anyway, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. That's about a third of a day's journey. They were talking with each other about everything that had happened. Verse 15, and as they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them, but they were kept from recognizing him. And he asked them, so what are you guys doing? What are you discussing? You seem having a pretty interest going along what are you talking about as you go along? And they stood still, their faces downcast. One of them, named Cleopas, the use of a name, I think, is significant because it suggests that this is somebody who's well known in the community. That Cleopas is one of the witnesses to the resurrection. We might even call him an apostle. Not one of the 12 apostles, but one of the broader group of apostles to whom the risen Lord appeared and commissioned to share as a witness to the resurrection. One of them, named Cleopas, asked him, "Are you the only one visiting Jerusalem who doesn't know about these things?" "What things?" Jesus asks. "About Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. "He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people." So it's okay to call Jesus a prophet. He's much more than a prophet, but he was at least a prophet. He was just to start with, he was a prophet, priest, and king, right? He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. The chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. Verse 21, but we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. And what is more, it is the third day since all this took place. So it's part of a day counts as a day. So you have part of Friday before sundown. You've got sundown to sundown on Saturday. You've got sundown to morning, the third day. So it is Sunday morning, or at least by the time Jesus appears to them, it's probably mid-morning. Verse 21, in addition, some of our women amazed us. They went to the tomb early this morning, but did not find his body. And they came and told us that they'd seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Then some of our companions went to the tomb, Peter, and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see Jesus. So there's the problem. They're puzzled. People die and they're dead. They don't come back. That's just not what happens. And so they're very puzzled by this. Now, Jesus, of course, knows the rest of the story, and he begins to fill them in. Verse 25, he said, how foolish you are, how slow you are to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and then enter his glory? This is not, and as we've said repeatedly in various places, this was not something that they necessarily understood or expected. And so this is something new that Jews just weren't expecting the Messiah to die. So this is does not compute. Messiahs win. Even Peter in, for example, Mark 8. Peter says, you're the Christ, and Jesus says, you're right, and I'm going to die. And Peter's like, no, that's not going to happen. You're a winner, Jesus. And so this idea of a dying Messiah, it's a new concept. But Jesus explains it to them. Verse 27, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. This is the law and the prophets, the two main parts of the Hebrew scriptures, right? Hebrew scriptures, as we'll see later on in the chapters, were divided into the law, the prophets, and the writings. The writings, of course, having Psalms as a leadoff hitter. So he's basically opening up all the scriptures and explaining to them what they say concerning him. Verse 28, and as they approached the village to which they were going, Jesus continued on as if he were going farther, but they urged him strongly, stay with us. It's nearly evening. The day's almost over. And so he went in to stay with them. And when he was at table with them, verse 30, he took bread, he gave thanks, he broke it, and he began to give it to them. He's acting out the Lord's Supper a little bit here, isn't he? He's kind of like, does this remind you of anything? Verse 31, then their eyes were opened, they recognized him, and he disappeared from their sight. Verse 32, and they asked each other, were our hearts not burning within us while he was talking to us on the road and opening the scriptures to us? Verse 33, they got up and returned at once to Jerusalem. So they're going to travel through the night, it would seem. Or at least they're going to start during the twilight and finish during the night. 7 miles, let's see. If they're going, it takes me probably, let's say at a casual pace, I might do a mile in 25 minutes. So 7 times 20, 40. So this is going to take them probably 3 hours. They're probably in a hurry, though, so it might take them less than 3 hours to get back. They got up, they returned at once to Jerusalem. There they found the 11 and those with them assembled together and saying, it's true. The Lord is risen and has appeared to Simon." Then the two told what had happened on the way and how Jesus was recognized by them when he broke the bread. So it seems like this is still Sunday. Now, when we go to Acts 1, there'll be a 40-day period. And so it's quite possible that Luke has again syncopated the story a little bit here for an artistic presentation. That's allowable in ancient history writing. Not accusing Luke of any foul play at all whatsoever, but there may be a little compression in this chapter, or maybe not. Maybe the Lord did appear to Peter on Easter Sunday. That's the way, if we take Luke 24 straightforwardly, that would seem to be the case, that the Lord did appear to Peter at some point on Sunday. It's just very peculiar that this most important of all appearances, 1 Corinthians 15, he appeared to Peter. It would seem that this would be narrated somewhere. And if it happened in Jerusalem on Easter Sunday, then it's not narrated anywhere in any of the Gospels or New Testament. That would be peculiar. But again, I'm not saying it ain't so. There's a lot of things, a lot of questions. I'm going to have my big volume of questions to ask when we get to heaven. I'm going to stop there this week. We've gone through Luke 24, 1 through 35. And so, Lord willing, next week we will finish Luke 24 on through the Bible in 20 years.